What's going on, everyone? You're listening to another episode of Bridging the Gap here on the Jersey First TV network. We're glad to be back with you guys after a long week for me personally. It was a tough one. I had my first ever midterm in law school, so I think it went well. We'll see. I guess the only time will tell, like I was saying to Steve before, as to how well it actually went. But we will find out, and I'll let you guys know either way. If it went really well, I'll make sure that I give you like the exact grade I got, and if it didn't go well,
Yeah.
I'll say I got my grade back, and we'll leave it at that.
Well, I expected it to go something like next week we'll either start with guys, I got the highest grade in my class, first exam at law school. That's what I'm expecting.
Well,
That's just the standard that I know and I'm used to.
I won't
But
find out by next week, so
okay, all right. When it happens. And then for those of you, who haven't academically spent time with AJ, if the answer is something sort of along the lines of, I did the best I could. It's my first exam in law school, and I'm proud of that. Then my man pulled a little bit below what he was expecting. But
what I'm expecting. Let's just say this: I'm expecting a solid B, right? So if I get a B or above, I am thrilled. If I get a B minus, I'm happy. Anything less
now,
than that, I'm a little disappointed.
and I think it's important because context matters, right? I'm expecting a B on my first exam at Villanova Law School. Like the second half of that is really important. So even if it's a C, there's a lot of people that would be like, yeah, I'm real happy with a C for my first exam in law school at Villanova. You know what I mean?
Sure,
So
that's
I'm proud
true.
of you. I'm proud of you
Thank you,
either way.
Steve.
It's
Thank
a
you. I
big moment.
appreciate that. And how are you? How was your week this week?
Ah,
It's cutting down, literally cutting down because you're slimming yourself down and you're not eating as
yeah.
much.
Yeah. I mean, I got today when I walked into work, I did shave my beard, had a nice
So
little.
also another cutting down.
Yes. The unintended result of that was everybody that I crossed paths with today made some sort of comment about how skinny my face looks, about how I look sunken. They were throwing the term prep face around a lot. So we'll see. The dead tail for me was I measure my face width by like where my glasses sit, and the
Sure.
fact that my glasses
Do
are
look
starting
large.
they're starting to hang over the side of my face and they're looking like a
Yeah.
little comically big is a bit of a problem for me.
Yeah,
I'm slowly withering.
you're going to have to get smaller glasses, I think.
Yeah, for the next 6 weeks,
Yeah.
I'll go back to the old school wireframes.
Look real nerdy. That's okay though.
Yeah. It's tough,
Uh,
but I'm excited. The results are affirming, and I mean, similar to you, it's getting to that point where we're like kind of starting to see the competition, having an idea of where I'm going to land. And listen, between you and I and everybody listening, it seems like there's only one person that's like really seriously going to give me a run for my money, which is crazy to think about, as a first time competitor in such a serious sport. So we'll see. We'll see. We still got 6 weeks, so
for
a
sure.
lot can happen.
For sure. And you know what? Second place in a first competition, I'd say that's like getting an A on a first exam,
You're
like,
right. You're right.
so
You're right.
you have nothing to worry about. So,
Oh,
with that, let's get into a little bit of some stories going on. Today's show is going to focus mostly on education. I think there's a lot of stories with New Jersey education that we can get into. So, with the first story that we're going to cover today, we're going to talk about an op ed that was put into NJ.com. And basically, it talks about how not just New Jersey students, but all American students have been really struggling when it comes to coming back from COVID, right? So, according to a recent assessment done by the National Assessment of Educational Progress, American fourth graders have had some huge declines in reading and math. Some of them are a couple of months behind. Some of them are as much as 2 years behind where they should be because of what happened during the COVID pandemic. Unfortunately, most of that decline is seen in the Black and Hispanic communities as they've lost the most ground, seemingly. And unfortunately, based off of things in our society, Black and Hispanics are typically in lower socioeconomic classes, and that probably plays a role into these standards. It's a little bit more difficult to have steady internet at the house during COVID, and all of your classes are online on Zoom or whatever. On top of that, you're talking about kids that when the pandemic started were in second grade. So now they're in fourth grade. And when you're in second grade, you're learning how to read, you're learning math. You need to see the way that people's mouths move to learn how to speak and formulate these words, and then to read these words and to do these math problems, and that's just gone. And the actual face-to-face interaction sitting in the classroom was gone for 2 years. It makes complete sense, and it's exactly what people that were on the side of the aisle that was against major lockdowns, especially for students during this pandemic, were saying is exactly what was going to happen, and they were exactly right. um, so it seems like, um, what studies have shown is that if by the age of 9, these students don't start getting back to where they should be, the chances that they will be able to read proficiently diminish incredibly rapidly. And basically, if you're not somewhere close to proficient by the age of 9, your dropout rates are higher, which leads to less money once you're out of school, and more likely to be involved in the criminal justice system from a younger age, because schooling gets people off of the streets and areas that lead to crime, right? So now people are dropping out of high school, they're going to be making less money, which continues to perpetuate a cycle of lower socioeconomic status, which is exactly what we don't want, exactly the reason we pay for these public schools. And it's not like our public schools aren't making money. It's not like they're not getting the money from the state. They still are. And yet we see this decline. And the op-ed goes in to talk about how New Jersey's rhetoric is there, but they're not really doing anything for our students. And I know that Jersey First has been on top of this in our social media posts. So if you do go check out Jersey First Media, especially their Instagram, and you check out the link in the bio, if your student is struggling, we do have links to some of the best tutors in the state of New Jersey. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. But Stephen, I think that it goes without saying that this is a crisis across America and in New Jersey, and we need to figure something out to help these students. And I know from the beginning of these lockdowns, like, we knew that COVID didn't really affect children, and they weren't
Mhm.
really passing it in the same rates as adults were passing it to each other. There was really at by the beginning, by September of 2020, yeah, September of 2020, there was no reason to keep kids out of school. Kids in Florida were going back to school. Kids in Texas were going back to school. It, places with Republican governors were sending their kids back to school, and places with Democratic governors weren't. It was pretty much that simple. And if you look at the numbers, some there are states that have better numbers in this education, and it's the ones that were in school.
I mean, so you took the words right out of my mouth. This is very obviously a crisis in every sense of the word. And I think it's an important thing to sound the alarm on as early on as we can. Now that we're actually seeing tactile proof of the fallout of these COVID protocols that children were, whether you agree or disagree with, made to follow for their, safety and protection in schools. The thing that jumps out to me, right? You mentioned the increase in the probability of being involved in the criminal justice system, victimizing, becoming a victim of that, and the cyclical sort of lifestyle that leads when you don't have access to education, you're afforded less opportunities, whatever it may be. The thing for me too that was jumping out my brain when we were talking about this is, how does this make us look comparatively on the world stage, right? Because this is not something that America's had our first struggle with. I know the Bush presidency, a lot of his first term was marked by tremendous education reform, which, hindsight now, people can have their opinions on it. And this is not a show about the history and prior policy decisions of presidents. But the point is, America, in everything that we do, we want to be a leader, right? That's kind of our whole motto, is we set the standard. And it seems like education has been a topic, and I know you know this, but politically, certain topics kind of like rise in popularity for a few years. We get it to a place where we're comfortable, and then everybody's like, all right, we're going to move on from that. We're going to worry about this, whatever it may be. This to me, like I said, is a clear, very loud, ringing alarm that education needs to be a primary focus of anybody who wants to hold public office, whether you be at the municipal level or the federal level, because these things have long-term effects on the citizenry, which has long-term effects on the output and proficiency of us to function as a nation on the global stage in every capacity, whether it be business, politics, whatever it may be. The ability of a population to be educated and educated proficiently is core to how we function in a globalized world, which is what we live in. It's not like we're just dealing with ourselves and maybe one or two other countries. We're more connected than ever, and the competition, if we're being honest, and this is going to sound like some trope that you've probably heard for years from like crazy old men, but like the Chinese kids are in school longer than American kids. Their coursework is much more rigorous, and they produce much better high performing students than America does. And who has Biden kind of been pointing his sights at and tickling around with? Russia and China. These
Sure.
we want to be competitive in every possible sense, economically, politically, when it comes to the military, and education is just as important as all of those things, because if your population is uneligible, excuse me, is unable is the word I want to use, um, to function at a basic level of proficiency, whether it be in things like literacy, financial literacy, understanding science, mathematics, all these things, you're going to suffer. There's long-term consequences from that. And
Yeah,
I think
absolutely. Like education is the basics. It's
it's the
the
bedrock.
building block that all of those other things come out of. So
Correct.
so absolutely, you're not the world stage, right? America's leading of the world stage as innovators. We're leading on the world stage as the place of opportunity to come to. And quite frankly, it's like, yeah, it's going to be a leading force for a place to come to on the world stage because other places are going to be highly educated populations and we're going to have to supplement our own population because we're failing our students.
Well, and that's what it is. And I'm glad that you phrase it that way. It is a failure of the government on the students and the children of this country at the moment that we allowed these regulations, which people were sounding the alarm then also. Granted, it was much more contentious sounding of the alarm. Um, but these it's not hard, and obviously hindsight is 2020 to see, like you even the example you used, you're making kids wear masks in the second grade. If they can't see how somebody's mouth moves when they're learning how to say the word, onomatopoeia, they're never going to learn correctly how to say the word onomatopoeia,
Right.
you know? And sure, that's an isolated, small, minute example of like one word, one particular regulation and circumstance and whatever it may be. But exasperate that over a nation of children for 2 years, and it's like compounding interest. It just builds and collects.
Right. And
Now
you're
we're
talking
left
about
with a problem.
sure, and you're talking about second graders. Imagine kindergartners and first graders that need that even more. And just
Yeah.
also, on top of just knowing how to say certain words, read certain words, do math, but social interactions, right? You're putting these kids in masks, you're putting these kids in bubbles, being scared of their own shadow, basically, scared that they might come home to mommy and daddy and bring home this disease for 2 years. You don't think that that's going to put some major anxiety into these kids on top of them not being able to do basic reading at the age of 6, 7, 8, 9? Of course it is. And the thing that's so bothersome about it is that we knew it was going to happen. Like it it was so obvious. You just need to be around kids for like a little bit of time and you would know exactly the consequences of your actions. It's
Yeah.
it's just mind-boggling that you let it happen, and I mean, clearly and this doesn't win you favors in the state of New Jersey to say this, but, like, it's all the teachers union. They didn't wanna go back to school, and our kids are suffering because of it, and I think that it's just about as clear as it can possibly be. Because in other states where the unions aren't as strong, guess what? The kids did go back to school, and guess what? The kids aren't as far behind.
the other thing that I think is important to talk about, and I'm glad you mentioned. So for the past, I don't even, it's not even fair of me to put a number on it, but there's been an increase in conversations surrounding the severity of the mental health crisis in this country, right? To your point, are we now raising a generation of children, who their entire fundamental, like foundational experiences with education, socialization, like building friendships, and all of these things, the basis for all of those interactions and fundamental skills of life is fear and anxiety, right? Like,
Absolutely. On top of
I
that, you have
think,
social media.
yeah. So I think, and this is something, again, hindsight being what it is, how inconsiderate of us as adults, voting adults in this country, to allow our children to be subject to regulation and these requirements and rules that we're giving mental health issues to people our age, older than us. If they are fully developed adults, how are these children going to deal with this? How did we not consider the outcomes of these things when we were telling kids to mask up and to stay 6 feet away from your friends? And I mean, the craziest one to me was that period in the first like 2 months when everybody was like washing everything that came into the home. Do you know how anxiety inducing it is to think that nothing that enters your home, even if you went out and touched it and bought it and purchased it yourself, is safe to be in your living quarters?
Sure, and
It
it's one thing the first 2 months, but we had clear data, especially on how this affects children, so early on
early.
that we ignored. And there's no other way around it. Or I don't even know if we ignored it. We didn't care, or people didn't care. I won't say we because people were sounding the alarm. There's a reason. There's a reason why kids didn't go back to public schools, and parents that could do it started sending their kids to private schools or homeschooling them because they saw the path that this was going down. And it's upsetting, and I'm a product of a public education. I like to say it all the time, right? I went to a public elementary school, a public middle school, a public high school, a public university. I got a master's degree from a public university. I'm the product of New Jersey's public education, and I think I do a pretty good job. I think that I'm a pretty decent product of that. I'm proud to be from New Jersey educators. I think that New Jersey teachers are wonderful. The teachers union is not New Jersey teachers, and
Right.
I'm not proud of that.
So just to your point, and maybe to stroke the ego a tiny bit more, we did kick this off by talking about how you thought you did so well on your first exam at Villanova Law School, right? Like, to put fact to paper, that is what it is. And I would say the same thing. I am also the product of an entirely publicly funded education that's taken me to places that I never could have imagined, holding the degrees that I hold and the opportunities that I've been afforded as a result of that. I think that this is a perfect opportunity to kind of transition into the second thing that we want to talk about, because it does deal largely with unions and the education association here in New Jersey, and regulations that are being imposed that might have an effect on the way that our children are growing up. So this is from njpatch.com, and it was posted today. And I mean, I will read the headline, and the headline to me was jarring enough that I think it's something worth speaking about, and it works perfectly in conjunction with everything that we just spoke about. The headline for this article reads: New Jersey vows to discipline schools that don't teach new sex ed curriculum. So, what this is in reference to, the Department of Education had sent out a memo that was basically saying school districts that are non-compliant with the educational standards that they had worked through, voted on, and approved in 2020, COVID year, um, are at risk of losing things like monitoring from the state, the ability to locally control curriculums. And, in extreme cases, the Department of Education said that these districts might even lose state aid if they don't implement these curriculum standards. So, what are these standards? These are the things that you hear all the news. Like Florida was a hotbed for this one when it happened, but the new curriculum talks about sexual health, sexual orientation, gender identity, um, and it has to do a little bit with that age of when these things are being introduced. New Jersey's a little bit unclear about that, and there's been some interesting polling about it. Majority of New Jerseyans agree that those conversations and that kind of education curriculum should be introduced to students in middle school by a majority. Once you bring that down to elementary school, this is a Rutgers poll that they did on today, came out on Wednesday. A majority of people, 51%, so a slim majority of people opposed implementing this kind of health and sexual education in elementary schools. So what I want to talk about and what I think is worth pulling out of this conversation is a few things, right? So is it right of the state to kind of hold control over curriculum and state aid over these schools to implement policies that, are very clearly contentious to the parents that are sending their kids to these public schools? And on top of that, is it fair or is there, I got to find the right way to phrase it to articulate the point correctly. Some districts are offering workarounds for these curriculums. So the state says that you have to opt out of them. Some districts, and Lakewood in particular was mentioned in the article, have been offering opt-in options, meaning that your child is not immediately enrolled in this kind of curriculum. And rather, if you want your child to be exposed to it, you have to write a letter saying, I want you to put my kid in this curriculum. And then it happens. So I think that, as another just degree of something to speak about, is going to be an interesting legal battle, because that's ultimately what it's going to turn out to be. The state saying you have to offer this and parents have to opt out. And just for the lawyer in the room, the language is that they have to write a formal letter to the principal detailing how the subject matter, quote, conflicts with their concise or sincerely held moral or religious beliefs. So that's the standard that a parent needs to, right? Kind of meet and describe and explain why they do not want their child exposed to this content. And what schools are saying is essentially the opposite of that: is tell us why you want your kid exposed to this and we'll put them in the curriculum. So I'm curious your thoughts on that. I'm curious your thoughts on the situation as a whole, what the state is doing, what is the responsibility of a school district, what's the responsibility of the parents here? And
so
there's so much to unpack.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of layers here. I think I want to start off by saying, like, it would be hypocritical for anyone who was a supporter of what Ron DeSantis did in Florida with the bills that he passed to say that the state of New Jersey doesn't have the right to do the exact same thing, but on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Like, if you supported Ron DeSantis's, decision to take this type of curriculum out of the schools from K through, I think it's K through 6 or K through, maybe it's K through 8, but I think it's K through 6 in Florida. Then you have to say that New Jersey has the right to do the opposite, and you could disagree with that, right? You could agree with the rule or against the rule, but you have to understand that both states have the right to do it. So it's not a matter of, does the state of New Jersey have the right to teach this stuff to students? I think that they have the right to put it in their curriculum, and in saying that, then they have the right to tell public schools, like, hey, this is the curriculum that you have to follow, right? So I think that New Jersey is on solid ground, legally speaking, to force these schools to teach the curriculum that they put in with our state legislature. Now, if you disagree with that, which I do, I don't think this is something that you should be teaching kids in elementary school. I don't think that necessarily this is something that you should teach kids as early as middle school. High school, it's a different story. Kids are a little bit more developed. They have a little bit more of understanding of their own bodies and the way that their bodies um, interact, I guess, with the world around them in a way like when you're in seventh or eighth grade, you're just starting sixth, seventh, eighth grade, you're just starting to go through puberty. You don't really understand what's going on in your body yet. And so to introduce ideas that might be confusing to students is, I think, not right and unfair. Now, people can disagree with me on that. That's all well and good. And what you want to do and how you want to teach your child is on you. And how the state legislature, which is an elected body, wants to put it in the curriculum is on them. If you disagree with the state legislature's decision, guess what? Vote them out of office or run for office yourself, run for school board, whatever the case may be, and fight back against it. All that being said, I think that what this really comes down to is parents do have the right to have a choice over what their kids learn, whether that's at home or in the school. And it's whether we like it or not, that's the way that it is. That is a parent's right. It's a bedrock right of being a parent, and it always has been since the foundation of our country and before. So, as a parent, if you disagree with this, and you can take your kid out of the public school, do other types of schooling, whether it's private or homeschooling sects that they have, the whole nine yards. I think that parents should be allowed to opt their kids out of this or opt their kids in. I think that's a little tricky. Like, can you opt your kid out of history class? No, you probably shouldn't do that. And you probably be very difficult to do something like that. But this is a new curriculum. This is something different. We don't know the consequences of this on the student population. And you could think that the consequences are good consequences, or you can think that the consequences are bad consequences. The fact of the matter is we don't know what 20 years down the road looks like. And
Yeah.
and so this is a hotbed of an issue. If you disagree with this from a practical level, then vote the state legislature out and get ones that agree with your priorities in. Personally, I don't think that it's something that should be taught in elementary school. I think that it's it's a mistake of our legislature to even do this to begin with. That being said, from like a legal perspective, if I have to take my objective hat and put it on, you can't turn around and say, I like what Ron DeSantis is doing in Florida, and he has every right to do it, and say, even because I dislike what Phil Murphy and our administration is doing in New Jersey, they don't have the right to do that. Like, you can't square that circle.
I agree. I think just before I give any takes, I did some quick research. The bill with DeSantis was K through third.
K through third. So even like K through third, like even more do I support a K through third bill. You're talking about 7-year-olds.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be talking about sex with 7-year-olds.
Agreed. Agreed. And then just for a little more clarity, this is straight from NJ.gov's website for their particular Department of Education. So I'm going to read a brief little sentence, and then I want to just run down the pillars of the new curriculum that this is all about, right? So it says the NJSLS CHPE, which stands for the New Jersey Student Learning Standards for Comprehensive Health and Physical Education, highlights the expectation that all students participate in high-quality K through 12 sequential health and physical education programs that emphasize 21st century skills and interdisciplinary connections to empower students to live a healthy, active lifestyle. So that's their mission. And then these are the pillars of these sequential areas.
To me, that sounds like go outside and play 60.
Play 60, Michelle Obama. Personal growth and development, pregnancy and parenting, emotional health, social and sexual health, community health services and support, movement skills and concepts, physical fitness, lifelong fitness, nutrition, personal safety, health conditions, diseases and medicines, alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, dependency, substance disorders, and treatment.
So a lot of that sounds fine, right? And when you're getting into the sexual education stuff, the pregnancy, the sexual health, all of that stuff, like that's not something that needs to be brought into the curriculum, in my opinion, until people are at least of the age that that is even a concern, right? Which isn't
Yeah.
till they're like 13, 14 years old, sometimes a little earlier,
Yeah.
but in general.
Yeah. I mean, so me personally, I I don't think prima facie that I disagree with much of what you said. Your point about DeSantis and it being hypocritical to say one's good and one's bad, I think that's an important thing to note because unfortunately, and this is me being, the idealist that I am, I think it's, you know, borderline unforgivable that we exist in a system and the state of affairs now is that even the education that we teach our children is politically divisive, right? Like there's a core curriculum for a reason. It's things that everybody should know. It's things that like regardless Republican, Democrat, your family values, like you need to learn math. You need to learn basic arithmetic. You need to learn how to read. You need to learn how to write. You need to learn about history. And I think a lot of the things that, this particular comprehensive plan that they just are now implementing touches on those things. I think everybody, at some point should learn about the dangers associated with pregnancy, with substance dependency, with physical fitness, nutrition. Like all of those things are important fundamental skills to being a person, not a Republican or a Democrat or a liberal or a conservative, right? So to me, drawing those lines and picking out curriculum and making it political, I think we're doing a disservice to our children and the efficiency of our school system. That's my honest opinion. Um, but I think it's just it is an impossible place to have a position on, right? Because not every parent can afford or has the means to take their child out of public school, right? That's why public schools exist. So at some point, the reality of the situation is, like you said, you either need to vote these people out, run yourself, or understand that the circumstances of your situation and the situation of the legislature that's voting and passing these curriculum is what it is. And I also don't think that education begins and ends with the school bell. If a child comes home, one of the most important things in my family, and I'm almost certain it's the same in your family, when we sat down for dinner every night, what'd you learn in school today?
Yeah, that's the
And we
first
would talk
question.
about it. Exactly. Every single day. And we would talk about it. And education, and when I say education doesn't, start and end with the school bell, if there's something that, my mother and my father had a different opinion on, and I did it to my sister when she was growing up, especially when I was like in college and she was still in high school, and she'd be like, "Oh, I learned this today," and I'd be like, "Yeah, that's one way to think about it," but given my experiences and my life experiences outside of school, this is also another opinion to have or another reality to consider. So I think if you're a parent and circumstances confine you to you're having your child involved in some sort of curriculum that you don't like, whether it be regarding sexual health or not, I think it's always incumbent upon the parents to take some responsibility, a high degree of responsibility in their child's education by being an active participant in it in any way that they can. So if you can't vote them out, if you can't run for yourself, and like we were talking about before, the legal questions about these opt-in, opt-out programs are budding, and there's not really an answer to them. Teach your kids what you want to teach them at home. That's the most important thing. There's no reason to get online and or show up at these school board meetings and, in my opinion, cause a ruckus and disrupt a system that's not working to begin with, when you could come home and square your beliefs with your child.
Yeah, I mean,
Socialization happens as much in the home as it does in the school.
I think that a lot of that is right. I would disagree. If you feel displeasure about this, I think you should absolutely go to your school board. You should absolutely have at least a conversation with your child's teacher, and you should make sure that that your feelings are there. And I doubt you're the only one in the community that feels that way. And it should be known that people disagree with this. That's kind of the whole part of the democracy, is that your representatives represent you, and if they're doing something you don't like, they need to know that, right? But that being said, a lot of what you said, 100% I agree with. Education doesn't start and end in the school bell. If anything, it starts and ends in the house, and the school house is like just a section of that starting and ending. Um, and like you said, a lot of what is in this curriculum isn't necessarily on its face bad. It's just a matter of when you teach this to and to whom you teach it to,
Correct.
and how you teach it is important too, right? So all of those things are going to go into this. And I don't know, at the end of the day, at the end of the day, parents need to sit down and have the conversations with their with their children when they come home. And the biggest problem is that you see it in a lot of schools around the country, is that when there are certain topics that are particularly hotbeds, the topics of transgenderism in particular, when when students are told that if their parents object to anything about this, that means their parents are the bad guys. That isn't okay either. Like we're living in a time where there are really complex issues that we don't know the ramifications of. And I think that for a parent to hear that their child maybe wants to go by a different name or a different gender, right, is a difficult conversation that should be had at the home, not outside of the home. Because because guess what? At some point, that person, that child, isn't going to be under the care of the school. That child does have to go home. And those parents are the sole responsibility if anything happens to that child. They have every right in the world to know what is going on in their child's life. And schools have zero right to hold that from the parents. And yet they are. And I think that's where the biggest problem in this lies, is that there are schools all over the country, including in the state of New Jersey, that are hiding these things from parents. And that can't go on.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think, and this is what makes this issue so tricky for me, right? Because I don't disagree with anything that you said, but the entire time what was going through my head was, in my opinion, there's always a right and a wrong way to deliver information, whatever that information may be, right? There is like the best possible way and the worst possible way. And I feel like most times people just go for whatever's in the middle there, right? When you're talking about these issues of transgenderism, right? And this is something that I know you and I can speak about, and just generationally, because of where we exist, we're kind of on this cusp where when I was in sex ed in middle school and high school, we didn't learn about gender identity or transgenderism and any of those things. Like that was not ever a part of my curriculum or topics of discussion that would come up organically. Like that just was not in the lexicon, right? But we're seeing people who are 3 or 4 years younger than us, spatially in the same generation as us, that are now kind of privy to these things and engaging in these conversations in classrooms. To me, I think that when you're talking about matters like pregnancy, things like substance abuse, drugs, right? Those are all pretty tactile things. Pregnancy at the end of the day is a biological function of the body, right? There's
It is
only
the biological consequence of having sex is getting pregnant. Like that is
yes,
the line that happens.
yes, right. But I mean, like, just for discussion's sake, pregnancy, right? There's only one way to teach what pregnancy is, how it happens, and what happens in it. And there's no real social consequences to having a discussion about pregnancy. I think the biggest social consequence is you never ask a woman if she's pregnant, right? Like
Well, yeah, sure.
that's
I mean,
that's
or
what you
you
learn.
have the abortion debate, which isn't happening in health class anyway.
Exactly.
Like,
I think the things that make people fired up about this education are those sort of what used to be taboo topics that are now kind of becoming more in the daily conversation, things like transgenderism, gender identity, gender fluidity, sexuality. I think that my personal opinion, my personal suggestion, if I had any say over how these things are taught, is you wouldn't learn them the same way that you learn about pregnancy or drugs. You would learn them it because I see this largely as a, and this is going to sound crazy, but I don't think it's that crazy to claim. It's a civil rights conversation, right? When you're talking about, these are people, right? Like transgender people, gay, bisexual, LGBTQ plus people who live different lives than you. So you need to teach tolerance and acceptance of those things, that's based on just an understanding of what it is. So if you learn this is what a trans person is, and you learn, about somebody like Marsha Blackburn, I believe that's her name, the woman from, or Marsha Johnson, from Elizabeth,
And
who was like the
Marsha
first,
Blackburn is a senator
yeah,
or Senate candidate,
something like that. But like when you're gonna
Tennessee senator.
There you go. I mean, you can learn about her too, but so when you're having that conversation, which to me should happen at the high school level, you start that section of the curriculum off by saying, this is who, Marsha Johnson was, and this is her story, and this is why it's important that, we understand the lives and what makes somebody trans, whatever. And you teach it as a concept of tolerance for another person's way of life, because I think at the end of the day, that's what it is. And teaching acceptance, as opposed to, well, this makes you straight, this makes you gay, you're either one or the other, go home and tell mom and dad now. Like that is so the wrong way to do it.
Or also, oh, you don't feel comfortable in your body? Well, maybe it's because you're the opposite gender. Like, that's kind of what some kids are being taught in some school districts, and that's not right either. Maybe
No.
somebody's just uncomfortable with their body, because that's what happens to literally everybody that has ever gone through puberty ever in the history of man.
Well, yeah, that.
Like, but I think you're right. The biggest thing when it comes to any sort of topic like this is teaching tolerance. Like, people are people. You can disagree with somebody's way of life. You can disagree with whatever, but to be just cognizant and understanding that everybody is different, everybody has different brain, everybody has a different body, and that the way that they might choose to show themselves is how they choose to show themselves, and at least give them the respect of, like, you do what you have to do, and I respect you as a human being. Like, absolutely, we should teach respect across the board. I would be hard pressed to find somebody that would disagree with that. And if they do disagree with that, then quite frankly, like, that person doesn't know what they're talking about. You should respect everybody who is a human being for the sole fact that they are a human being, right?
Yeah.
Unless, like, they're a really bad person that does a lot of bad things. But the fact of the matter is that, like, when you're talking about the issues of transgenderism or the LGBTQ community, like, you're not talking about bad people. You are talking about people that either, have different sexual attraction than you, or they have a different, orientation of how they present themselves than you do. And you can disagree with that, but you should respect that person for being a person, because they're not harming you in any way by acting in whatever manner they are. The problem becomes where I see the problem is that, dependent on how you teach it, you're going to cause certain confusions that don't need to be there, and that just riddle more anxiety and more just confusion of your body and how you function in the world. And that's unfortunate, and that's something that we should mitigate and not try and do our best to, when those types of confusions happen, parents should be involved in that type of confusion. And because these are minor children at the end of the day, even till the age of 17. Like, I'm sorry, if you can't sign off, if you need a parent signature to get a tattoo, like, your parents should know what's going on with your body.
I think, I mean, it is such, again, it is such an interesting, like, topic of education, because you have to imagine, and the reason that I say it's a civil rights issue, and that's why, I think it should be sort of taught that way, is what was curriculum like for students who went to school in the South in the 1940s when you talk about race relations in America, right? Like very clearly, how we express the experiences of other people that are different than us in an educational setting can be damaging, right? So it's important to mitigate that damage. And my whole position on this is just come from a place of teaching tolerance. Like you should be concerned with teaching tolerance within the lens of transgenderism, orientation, whatever it may be, as opposed to it being the other way, where we're going to teach you all about transgenderism and we're going to tell you that if you feel these things, you might be this, you might be that. And then, if we have time, we'll remind you that it's important that these are people too. I think that's a completely backwards way to go about this kind of education. And if we don't lead with the thing that we are missing from the conversation at large, which is tolerance for other individuals and those who are different than us, whether it be, with regard to these, sexual questions and things about orientation and, gender issues, or whether it be politically, or whether it's a line that's divided on race, if that's, something that people argue about still, which is archaic as it is. Teaching these issues and informing young people and students and children about them from a place of tolerance, to me, is the first step that we need to take. And the biggest issue that I see with this curriculum is that I don't know that that's how it's implemented. And you have
Yeah.
schools that are very clearly trying to offer ways out of it. And I don't know. To me, that doesn't really demonstrate great tolerance.
No, I would largely agree. Like, I don't think that the state of New Jersey in this curriculum is trying to teach you to respect transgenderism as or transgender people because they're people, or whatever the case may be. LGBTQ people because they're human beings and they deserve human decency and respect. Like, that's not the core of this curriculum. The core of this curriculum is seemingly like, if you're feeling this way, then maybe you're actually a boy and not a girl or whatever. And I don't think that that's a productive conversation myself. I think that if people are struggling with that, then let like sort of almost let them bring up that struggle. You shouldn't push that struggle onto somebody that it might not be there, which is seemingly what is happening.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I have nothing else to say other than it's kind of a great quagmire that I unfortunately believe are going to be stuck in for a very long time. I do want to just throw out this quote that was included in the article to just kind of like hit the hammer. I always mess that saying
Yeah,
up.
hit the nail on that.
Hit the
The
nail on the head.
nail on the head
I want to
with
I
the
want to hit
hammer.
yeah.
Hammer the
And
nail on the head.
yes, that's what I want to do. Um this is from State Senator Joe Panaccio. I apologize if I messed that up. He's the Republican state senator from the 26th legislative district in New Jersey. This is a direct quote. Parents and local communities deserve to know if Governor Murphy is going to send the sex police into their school districts to punish those who stand in opposition to the concerning state mandates. It's absolutely obscene that elected local school boards that are accountable to parents, voters, and their communities could be replaced for not complying with inappropriate standards imposed by the unelected State Board of Education. That quote to me perfectly encapsulates everything that we talked about, right? The second half of that, cool. I'm there. We all agree on that. The first half of that, if Governor Murphy wants to send sex police into the schools, sir, sir, who is signing up to be a sex police officer? Where is that branch? What do their badges look like? It doesn't exist. You made it up because you disagree with what he's trying, what this initiative is, and you're politicizing it. And if it was a Democrat saying the same thing about a Republican, I would feel the same way because this is, like I said, is an issue that is, in my opinion, based on tolerance. And when you have these representatives to bring this kind of full circle sitting here acting intolerant about it, it's a quagmire. What do you do?
Well, I would say that state senator wasn't acting intolerant about like the people, like people that are have different gender identification or ideologies. He was attacking the fact that this curriculum is is barring parents from having the ability to choose what their students learn in school. And it's political rhetoric. Like at the end of the day, if I was a communications director for a majority of politicians, they wouldn't say what they say because political rhetoric, political rhetoric is important and people forget about it.
I'll be
Because if
honest
you're
with you.
trying to win the other side over, if you're trying to win the other side over, you don't like victim, like making them the enemy. Getting around the idea of they are the, in this case, the sex police, as opposed to, the speech police or the thought police. Like
Mhm.
that's the equivalency there. And it's like, well, not exactly. But so yes, to your point, yes, bad political rhetoric. But I don't think he's trying to be attacking of the LGBTQ community. I think what he's trying to attack is that this curriculum, which was not even apparently passed by the state representatives, it was passed by an unelected branch of the executive, which is even worse. Um, like, it is enforcing on parents something that it shouldn't.
Yeah, I don't know. It's so. I agree to your point and what I was going to say before. I think that for great example, Donald Trump's his political communications have been so much better since we stopped putting microphones in front of his face because he just can't talk willy nilly, And to that point, this kind of rhetoric, exactly the larger point that I think we can make here is at the end of the day, right? Parents are going to disagree on what their kids should learn, right? There's some things that we're all like, yeah, you should know that 2 + 2 = 4. Do I think that you need to know at the age of 10, about sexual orientation and transgenderism and these other, sexual health questions? Do I think, at age 10, you need to know what sex is? No. If we want to disagree on those things, let's disagree on those things. And let's handle that in the home and approach those things from tolerance. But to get out and talk about the sex police, man, that's just to me. I had to throw it in there because I read that and I was like, there's no way that this guy got in front of people and was like, where is Governor Murphy's sex police? Where are they? Sir, why are you looking for them? Uh-oh.
Fair, fair, and you're right. I think that the questions of sex, especially at a certain age, should definitely be residing in the home.
Yeah,
The birds and the
that's it.
bees was always the conversation that mom and dad had, not what Miss Terry in fourth grade had, right? Like I don't. It's just whatever. I actually have never had a Miss Terry as a teacher, so there you go. I just made that up on the spot.
Me either.
Okay, there we go. With that, I don't know if you can tell, Stephen, but
You're
I had
hanging
a
on for
long
dear life.
day. I had
You're
a long
hanging
day.
on.
I literally had half a muffin today. So I think that the conversations that we had are important. I think that they are productive. I think that going forward, the big thing is that, first of all, if we know anything about the state of New Jersey, and this is no surprise to anybody, teachers' unions have a lot of sway, and weight on the politics of the state of New Jersey. Big reason why Chris Christie was disliked was because he disliked the teachers' unions. I think at the end of the day, myself and almost every single person on planet Earth is the person that they are today and successful the way that they are today because some great teacher or teachers impacted them in a way that was immeasurable. Teachers matter, teachers are important, and I don't think anybody is discrediting that. My biggest gripe is with teachers' unions, which are a different story, and union representatives are a different group and sect of people. On top of that, we need to start doing right by our kids because in 20 years, those are the people that are going to be making the decisions of our country in 30, 40 years too, right? These things have long lasting impacts that we're not going to see tomorrow, that we're not going to see next week, but we will see 10, 15, 20, so on years from now. It's time to start doing right by our kids. It's time to stop using kids as political pawns in messaging and start to understand that the decisions that we make for our students are the decisions that are going to have to last for the future of our country. We should be teaching kids things like civics and math and reading and writing, arithmetic at young age. When they get older, we should absolutely be teaching them about nutrition and life sciences and health sciences and biology and sex education and things like that so that we have an educated society. But we shouldn't be confusing our kids unnecessarily, and we shouldn't be allowing our kids to fall behind the rest of the world because of political motivations and faulty science.
I agree with that entirely. I think, and to your point, there's a certain age where that's important, right? Like when you're fully developed and you have that baseline understanding of, you should learn biology before you should learn about pregnancy, right? We want to stack and make these things sequential so that they make sense. But furthermore, to the larger conversation about education, which I think you gave great commentary on, simply put, I believe that the children are the future. We should teach them well. We should let them lead the way. We should show them all of the beauty that they possess inside, give them a sense of pride, you know?
Sure, sure. I disagree with one line of that. I don't think we should let them lead the way. I think kind of the whole point is that we're teaching them. So we are leading the way for them
To lead the
follow.
way. Yes. Yes. That was a great little shout out to New Jersey's finest, Whitney Houston, right there. For those that went over the
That went
head on.
over. That's a good one.
Um,
I do love Whitney.
I do too. I was gonna sing
The
it, but
greatest love of all, really. Thank you.
oh my god. The
I'll take a
applause
bow
is
on that one.
resounding. No, but in all seriousness, to encapsulate the entire conversation we had over this past hour, it's important. It's always been important, now, 15 years ago, 100 years ago, that we make sure that the children who are coming after us are as well equipped and, if we're doing things correctly, better equipped than we were when we were in their position to kind of take the reins of this great society that we've built. Like the larger commentary is not just a political one. It's about that these are the people who are going to be, your teachers in the future, your doctors, your presidents, your senators, your janitors, your everything. We want to make sure that we're giving them the best tools that we have at our disposal to give them to succeed and be knowledgeable and great contributors to society and continue to push us forward. And I agree with you. If we clutter their developing young minds with these unnecessary and confusing topics that, are not traditionally taught at that age, I don't want to stick around to find out the consequences of that. You know what I mean? I want to prime our children to be the best that they can be at as many things as they can be good at, which is, the purpose of school. You get exposed to so many things. So ultimately, when I'm finished doing my work and contributing to society, the world that I've built for the children to come after me is better, and they can take that and continue that cycle, and we could just, continue to prosper and thrive as a society, as a species. But the minute we start messing up and then changing what we teach our kids, I think we open a Pandora's box. We don't know what's coming out.
Yeah, I think that's well put. Like, if you're going to change things and add things to curriculums, like, and I said this last week, I'm pretty sure about some other things, and just in general, my philosophy: be damn well sure that you know the consequences, because it's a squirrely game trying to mess around with established curricula and fact, and so be damn well sure you know the consequences.
Agreed.
But with that, this has been another episode of Bridging the Gap here on the Jersey First TV network. My name is AJ Malillo.
I'm Stephen Rombolo.
And I hope you guys stay tuned. You check out all the other shows on J First TV, and you join us again next week. Have a great weekend, everybody. Have a great week. See you then.